Hey everybody, so we are moving on from talking about opioids, and now we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the stimulants. All of the drugs that we're kind of talking about are classified as stimulants. They tend to act on the central nervous system in a very, very similar way. And basically what they do is they block reuptake. And in some cases, even reverse the uptake. So because they block the reuptake transporter for monoamines, what we're typically going to find is that this is going to enhance the effects of dopamine, enhance the effects of norepinephrine, and to a lesser extent, serotonin. So the first one that we're going to talk about is ephedrine. This is naturally occurring in plant species, including ephedra. Pseudoephedrine, you probably know better. It's the synthetic form, and it's used for medications like certain types of sinus medication, certain types of cold medication, and so on. As of 2005, pseudoephedrine is a controlled substance. There is a limit and a registry that keeps track of how much you're purchasing at once. So next we have amphetamines. Those are synthetic. They are available by prescription. Most were banned in 2005 by the FDA. They do have some therapeutic purposes, including Adderall for ADHD. They were previously sold over the counter. There were drugs like Dexatrim, which were diet pills that were basically sold during daytime TV. When I was growing up in the 1980s, I actually saw a lot of that. Methamphetamine, which you can see right here, is entirely synthetic as well. They have the addition of that methyl group, which is why we call it methamphetamine, of course. Generally, it is derived from either amphetamines and pseudoephedrine. It's part of the reason why they try to limit pseudoephedrine use because of its ability to be used in the production of meth. This is the form that's sold under the street names like meth, crystal meth, speed, crank. It was banned by the FDA in the late 80s, but it's very popular because it's relatively cheap to make, and its effects are typically more intense than those of amphetamines. That extra methyl group allows it to cross the blood-brain barrier more easily, so it lasts longer and as such is more addictive. And then finally we have cocaine. You can see that there's a slightly different structure here. It's a natural stimulant found in several plants, including the coca plant, which is native to South America. So generally, the mode of action for the general mode of action is to antagonize the reuptake pumps. In certain cases, for drugs like methamphetamine and the amphetamines in general, it can actually cause those pumps to work in reverse, which means that you are actually pumping out more monoamines than you are recycling. Generally, stimulants will enhance activity of dopamine in the mesolimbic pathway. Because they block reuptake and often cause those to pump in reverse, that means that more dopamine is getting released, and that will cause even greater increase in the nucleus accumbens. Now, generally, stimulants have a variety of different effects. That's because they act on all of the monoamines. So all of the following effects that are listed are the desirable effect of the drugs. These are the therapeutic ones that they're either prescribed for or illegally taken for. So first of all, we do know that stimulants have decongestant properties due to their actions on norepinephrine. They open up the airways and constrict the blood vessels. That opens up the nasal passages as well as the lungs. Stimulants can function as appetite suppressants. This is partially through the effect of norepinephrine. They constrict the muscle in the gut. That shuts down digestion. It also inhibits hunger signals. It does reduce fatigue, again, by enhancing the effect of norepinephrine and overall arousal on the brain. Stimulants generally reduce fatigue and promote energy through all of the actions of the monoamines, increasing overall arousal in the brain as well as norepinephrine in particular. The euphoria that is often associated with stimulants, particularly with ones like methamphetamine and cocaine, come primarily from their effects on dopamine. Stimulants were actually used in the past as different types of antidepressants. And for those who may not know, euphoria is a transcendent happiness or a very inflated sense of well-being. This is an abnormally high mood. Additionally, we do know that stimulants can increase attentional abilities and mental focus. That's why people take Adderall. And that's primarily through their effect on the mesocortical dopaminergic pathway. There are a wide variety of side effects that happen as well, because when you enhance all of these different neurotransmitters, and you'll notice that they're not selective, they act on all of the monoamines, the toxic effects and the side effects might be extreme versions of the desired effects. So having your heart rate go up a little bit might feel good, but it could eventually lead to tachycardia. So tachycardia is one particular thing that can happen because stimulants are vasoconstrictors. They will potentially lead to hypertension. You can have bruxism, which is excessive grinding of the teeth. This occurs because of increased blood flow to the muscles. You can also have some psychological effects like insomnia, aggression, irritability, impaired judgment. At worst case scenario, psychosis like delusions and hallucinations. Oftentimes this will occur because of overstimulation of dopamine circuitry. And generally, because of the effects of the reward circuitry, psychological addiction and dependency is a huge side effect. High doses of amphetamine can actually produce nerve cell death. Methamphetamine, that is also highly likely. High doses of cocaine can largely produce death to dopaminergic neurons. So what are the major routes of administration? The oral digestive route is common, though not for cocaine. Stimulants can be taken in liquid like tea. That's how ephedrine is taken. Pills are pretty common routes as well. Insufflation via snorting is a common route for cocaine as well as meth. Inhalation via smoking is common for freebase cocaine, which is known as crack. And because one of the reasons that coke and crack in particular are so addictive is because they're administered by the fastest routes. Stimulants can also be injected, although this is less common and it's probably the most dangerous because of the high risk of overdosing. So let's start by talking about ephedrine. Ephedrine doesn't really cross the blood-brain barrier very efficiently, so it largely acts on the peripheral nervous system and especially norepinephrine in the sympathetic nervous system. So it opens up the airways and it constricts the blood vessels, so we do have some decongestant. In its synthetic form, it is sold as Sudafed, which is called such because it's pseudoephedrine. There are many different species of the ephedra plant, which are ephedrine-containing plants. They tend to have a twiggy structure, as you can see. There are several species in the western United States. These are known as Mormon tea. In Asia, this is known as mahuang. It's been used in Chinese medicine for thousands of years. It is one of the oldest known used drug by humans. Neanderthals were reportedly using this about 60,000 years ago. It does have some addictive potential due to the fact that it does work on dopamine and the reward circuit. But like I said, it doesn't really cross very easily that blood-brain barrier, so it's typically not as addictive. The current status of ephedrine is that it is a controlled substance because it can easily be converted into meth. As of 2005 and 2006, any purchase of ephedrine or pseudoephedrine has to identify the name and the address of the purchaser. It's kept by the government for 2 years, which is why you have to show an ID and actually go to the pharmacy counter. Generally, there is only so much you can buy per month. So amphetamines cause the the monoamine reuptake barrier pumps to basically pump in reverse. So what this means is that, like ephedrine, amphetamines are agonists for the monoamines. These actually do cross the blood-brain barrier quite effectively, which makes them very, very highly addictive. These were synthesized by Bayer in 1887 from Ma Huang and was used as an asthma inhaler called Benzedrine in the 1930s, again, opening up those airways in the sympathetic nervous system. It was widely prescribed, but people found out you could take that amphetamine-soaked paper, swallow it, and get high off of it. So it was banned a few decades later. Basically, if you went to your doctor in the 1950s and said you were feeling tired and depressed and fatigue, doctors would actually prescribe you amphetamine. And they were basically done this way until about the 1970s, when the side effects became more well-known. They were also used as diet pills, so drugs like Dexatrim, Redux, and Fen-Phen were popular until the 1990s, until women started dying from heart abnormalities. So for this reason, these drugs are banned. Interestingly enough, amphetamines are used in the military sometimes. They're also commonly used and abused by truck drivers. So these were used in the military in World War II to help with fatigue and depression. German military in particular were big users of that. The U.S. started using amphetamines in the Korean War and after, and now many veterans of several of these wars have addictions to amphetamines and other drugs. These are currently available to Air Force pilots to help with fatigue and with issues related to focusing. So you will often see amphetamines, including Dexedrine, being sold under the idea that they're go pills. There are some therapeutic uses for amphetamines. So we can prescribe something like Ritalin or Adderall for people with ADHD. Generally, if a person without ADHD, you're not necessarily, if you take a high amount, you can get a lot of focus, but generally ADHD medication is prescribed in smaller doses, so it won't really do much for somebody without ADHD, but for somebody with ADHD, they can take a smaller amount, like 0.5 milligram, and they'll be able to focus a little more easily. So what we know is that there is a different threshold for these amphetamines for people with ADHD, and it could be due to reduced levels of dopamine. Narcolepsy is also a type of treatment. We don't really understand how it works, but we do know that stimulants, particularly Ritalin, can help. And then they are also used by the military. All right, meth. Meth is basically the street drug version of amphetamines. They are legal in all forms. This is one of the most highly regulated in the U.S. That extra methyl group allows methamphetamine to cross the blood-brain barrier more effectively, so it lasts longer and it's more addictive. Generally, when it is synthesized, it becomes crystalline in structure, which is why we call it crystal meth or sometimes ice. This is simple and cheap to produce. It's part of the reason why you tend to find that it's more widespread in impoverished or rural areas. As I said, it's part of the reason why pseudoephedrine is now regulated. People would buy Sudafed, go home and make meth and treat it with other chemicals like battery acid, paint thinner, drain cleaner. And oftentimes what will happen is that these home labs will blow up because you use these flammable chemicals, and most people are not Walter White from Breaking Bad and are not chemists. One of the largest producers of meth in the United States is actually the Hells Angels. The slang term crank for methamphetamine comes from the fact that they would smuggle drugs in the crankshaft of their motorcycles. All right. And then finally, we have cocaine, which is a naturally occurring drug that is found in the coca plant. The coca plant actually has a very long history of use with native peoples in South America. This use dates back thousands of years. The cocaine content in leaves is about 1%. That's pretty sizable. But the leaves are actually pretty nutritious. There are calories from carbohydrates and protein in the leaves, vitamins and minerals. People generally in that part of the world will pick up the leaves and chew on them or make a coca leaf tea called mate de coca for nutritional value, and generally has less of an effect than a cup of coffee would. We'll talk some more about this soon.